Imagine walking through Paris at night, past the cafés, past the traffic, past the bright windows and the sound of people laughing in the streets. Everything above ground feels alive. The city glows like a postcard. But then you find a narrow entrance, step down a spiral staircase, and keep descending until the noise of Paris disappears behind you. The air gets colder, the stone walls begin to sweat, the ceiling lowers, and after several minutes underground, you reach a doorway with a warning carved above it in French. Stop. This is the Empire of Death. On the other side of that doorway, the City of Light becomes something else entirely. Beneath Paris, under one of the most romantic cities on Earth, there is a silent world built from the bones of the dead. Skulls stare out from the walls. Femurs are stacked in patterns like bricks. Long corridors vanish into blackness, and somewhere in those tunnels, the remains of millions of people rest beneath the feet of the living. This is not a legend hidden in some remote mountain village. This is not a haunted ruin abandoned in the middle of nowhere. This is Paris, France, a city of fashion, art, revolution, beauty, perfume, and cafes. A city where people come to fall in love, and under it lies one of the largest underground ossuaries in the world. The Paris Catacombs were not created because someone wanted to build a tourist attraction. They were not designed as a horror show. They were born from pressure, decay, fear, politics, bad air, collapsing ground, and a city that had run out of room for its dead. To understand the catacombs, you have to forget the Paris you know for a moment. Forget the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, and the wide boulevards. Picture Paris before modern sanitation, before clean urban planning, before the city was polished into the elegant capital people photograph today. Picture narrow streets, crowded homes, markets pressed against churches, horses, mud, smoke, human waste, disease, and cemeteries packed far beyond anything that could be called peaceful. For centuries, Paris buried its dead inside the city. One of the most infamous burial grounds was the Cemetery of the Holy Innocents, known in French as Les Innocents. It sat near the heart of the city and served generations of Parisians. At first, it was just a cemetery. Over time, it became something closer to a crisis. Bodies were buried in layers. Then new bodies were buried above the old ones. Then more came. The cemetery kept receiving the dead from hospitals, parishes, epidemics, poverty, crime, and ordinary city life. Paris was growing, and death was growing with it. The living wanted space. The dead already had it, and the city kept trying to force both into the same crowded ground. The problem was not poetic, it was physical. The cemetery was overloaded. The soil was saturated. The smell became unbearable. Nearby residents complained about the air. Merchants complained that the odor affected their business. Walls around burial areas strained under the weight behind them. In some accounts, the pressure of mass graves became so severe that it pushed into neighboring cellars. The dead were no longer staying quietly where the city had placed them. By the late 18th century, Paris had a serious problem on its hands. It was not only spiritual or symbolic, it was public health. The cemeteries inside the city had become dangerous. They were too full, too close to homes, too close to food markets, too close to everything. Then came the moment that made the problem impossible to ignore. In 1780, after years of overcrowding and complaints, the Cemetery of the Holy Innocents was closed. The city could not keep pretending that the system worked. Paris had to remove the dead from the places where the living were trying to survive. But where do you move generations of human remains in a city already packed with people? The answer was waiting underneath Paris. Long before the catacombs became an ossuary, the underground tunnels had another purpose. They were quarries. Paris was built from stone, and much of that stone came from beneath the city itself. For centuries, limestone was extracted from underground deposits and used to build the churches, houses, palaces, and monuments above. The city was literally constructed by hollowing out the ground beneath it. At first, the quarries were outside the city limits, but Paris expanded. Streets and buildings spread over old extraction sites. What had once been distant underground workings became hidden cavities below neighborhoods. The city grew over its own emptiness. That emptiness eventually became dangerous. When stone is removed underground, something has to hold up what remains above it. If the supports fail, the surface can collapse. By the 1700s, parts of Paris were threatened by unstable ground. There were cave-ins. Streets and buildings could suddenly become vulnerable because the earth below them had been cut away long before anyone living there was born. The French monarchy recognized the danger. In 1777, the General Quarry Inspection was created to map, inspect, and stabilize the old underground quarries. Engineers went below Paris not to hunt ghosts, but to prevent the city from falling into itself. They reinforced galleries, built walls, marked passages, and tried to understand the hidden skeleton of the city. This is one of the strangest parts of the catacomb story. Before the tunnels held bones, they were already a kind of negative image of Paris, a second city made of darkness, pillars, chambers, and corridors. Above ground, people walked through streets. Below ground, inspectors moved through the empty spaces that made those streets possible. When the cemetery crisis became urgent, officials looked at those underground quarries and saw a solution. The old Tombessois quarries, deep beneath what is now the 14th arrondissement, could become a municipal ossuary. The dead could be removed from the overflowing cemeteries and placed underground, away from homes, markets, and daily life. In 1786, the site was consecrated as the Paris Municipal Ossuary. Soon, it took on the name that made it famous, the Catacombs. The name was inspired by the ancient catacombs of Rome, but the Paris catacombs were different. They were not originally secret Christian burial places. They were a practical response to an urban disaster. Still, practical decisions can become terrifying when they involve millions of bones. The transfers began at night. Imagine the scene: Paris after dark. Wagons moving through the streets, priests, workers, officials. The remains of the dead taken from old cemeteries and transported across the city. These were not fresh burials. Many remains came from mass graves and older cemetery layers. Bones were gathered, moved, and sent down into quarry shafts. The process was not quick. It lasted for years. Remains from several Parisian cemeteries were transferred underground. The dead of the city, once separated by parish, class, family, and time, were gradually mixed into a vast underground collection. Medieval Parisians, plague victims, Revolution-era dead, ordinary laborers, shopkeepers, children, aristocrats, prisoners, and people whose names had already been lost all became part of the same subterranean world. In the catacombs, identity dissolves. That may be the most disturbing thing about the place. It is not only that there are bones, it is that there are so many bones that individuality disappears. A skull on the wall might have belonged to a mother who sold vegetables near the market. Another might have belonged to a young apprentice who died before he ever owned anything. Another could have belonged to someone who survived hunger, war, or sickness, only to vanish into the same wall as everyone else. The catacombs do not tell you who they were, they tell you what remains. At first, the bones were not arranged in the theatrical style visitors see today. They were stored more simply, piled and deposited in the underground galleries. The transformation into the haunting monument known today came later, especially under the direction of Louis-Étienne Héricard de Thury in the early 19th century. He understood that the ossuary could be more than a storage place. It could become a moral, philosophical, and historical experience. That decision changed everything. The bones were arranged into walls. Skulls and long bones were placed in deliberate patterns. Plaques and inscriptions were added. The site became a place where visitors were forced to confront death in an organized, almost ceremonial way. The horror was not chaotic. It was composed. That is why the Paris catacombs feel different from an abandoned crypt or a battlefield grave. The bones are not scattered randomly across the floor. They are arranged with intention. The walls look architectural, but the material is human. The patterns are almost beautiful, and that beauty makes them more unsettling. A wall of skulls can feel grotesque. A wall of skulls arranged carefully, symmetrically, almost elegantly, feels like a message. And the message is impossible to miss. Everyone ends here. Paris understood spectacle long before modern media existed. By 1809, the catacombs had opened to the public by appointment. Visitors descended underground not just to see bones, but to experience a controlled confrontation with mortality. For some, it was educational. For others, philosophical. For others, no doubt, it was the thrill of standing in a place most people would never forget. Today, the official visitor route covers only a small part of the underground world. You descend about 20 meters beneath the city. You walk through narrow stone passages. Then you enter the ossuary, where the bones of several million Parisians line the galleries. The public route is limited, managed, and protected, but the larger underground network of old quarries extends far beyond what tourists see. That wider network has its own reputation. People who illegally explore the off-limits tunnels are often called cataphiles. They know hidden entrances, obscure passages, and underground routes that are not part of the official museum. Some go for adventure, some go for history, some go for the feeling of escaping the surface city entirely. The illegal tunnels have become a parallel mythology. Secret rooms, underground gatherings, graffiti, maps passed between explorers, and stories that are hard to verify because the people involved usually prefer not to be found. This is where the catacombs become more than a historical site. They become a boundary. Above ground, Paris is mapped, filmed, photographed, branded, and sold to the world. Below ground, Paris becomes uncertain. There are official passages and unofficial passages. There are reinforced galleries and dangerous voids. There are clean signs for tourists and dark tunnels where a wrong turn can become a serious problem. The official catacombs are haunting but controlled. The forbidden tunnels are something else. And that contrast is part of why the catacombs remain so powerful. They are both museum and maze, monument and warning, public attraction and underground rumor. They belong to history, but they also feed modern legends. One of the reasons those legends survive is simple. The setting is perfect. A hidden world beneath Paris. Bones, darkness, forbidden passages, people disappearing into tunnels, secret rooms, strange sounds, police patrols, urban explorers carrying lamps and maps. Even when a story is exaggerated, the place itself is real enough to make it believable. But the real history does not need much exaggeration. The catacombs already contain everything a dark story needs. A city built over hollow ground, cemeteries so full they became a threat, bones move through the streets at night, underground walls made from human remains, and a doorway that tells you exactly what you are entering. Stop. This is the Empire of Death. That phrase has become one of the most famous lines associated with the catacombs. It is dramatic, but it is not empty drama. It prepares the visitor for a change in rules. Above ground, life is divided into schedules, money, traffic, ambition, beauty, status, and noise. Below ground, those divisions collapse. The bones do not care who was rich, who was poor, who was loved, who was forgotten, who gave orders, who obeyed them, who owned land, who begged for bread. In the catacombs, Paris becomes equal. That equality is brutal. It does not comfort everyone. Some people walk through the ossuary and feel peace. Some feel awe. Some feel disgust. Some feel nothing at first and then think about it days later. The catacombs have a way of following people back to the surface. Because once you have seen walls made from the dead, the city above looks different. The cafe terraces are still full. The bakeries still smell warm in the morning. The Seine still moves under the bridges. Tourists still pose for pictures. Couples still kiss near the river. But now you know what is under the pavement. You know that beneath the romance is a storage place for millions of human endings. You know that Paris, for all its beauty, had to bury part of itself underground to keep living. That is the secret power of the catacombs. They do not destroy the image of Paris, they deepen it. Every great city has shadows. Paris just happens to have stacked them into walls. The story begins with stone. The limestone under Paris was valuable because it was useful, strong, and accessible. Builders needed it. The city consumed it. Churches rose from it. Mansions and public buildings depended on it. The more Paris wanted to become a city of stone, the more stone had to be taken from beneath or near it. Quarrying created wealth, buildings, jobs, and architecture. It also created voids. People rarely think about the empty spaces created by construction. They admire the building, not the absence that made the building possible. But under Paris, that absence remained. Over time, the old quarries became a hidden hazard. The surface city changed hands, rulers, styles, and regimes. But underground, the cavity stayed. Some were mapped, some were forgotten, some were reinforced, some were unstable. Paris had built itself by hollowing itself out, and eventually it had to reckon with that decision. That is the first layer of the catacombs, the city's hunger for material. The second layer is the city's dead. For much of European history, cemeteries were not always quiet green spaces outside the city. They were often central, crowded, and deeply connected to churches and neighborhoods. People lived close to burial grounds. Markets operated nearby. Death was not hidden in the way many modern cities try to hide it. But closeness has limits. When a burial ground receives too many bodies for too long, reverence turns into danger. The Cemetery of the Holy Innocents became a symbol of that danger. It had served Paris for centuries, but by the 18th century, it was overwhelmed. The city had to make a decision that was both practical and emotionally violent: remove the dead from their resting places. In theory, bones are remains. In reality, they are memory. Moving them is never just a technical operation. It changes the relationship between a city and its past. Families who once had some connection, however distant, to a burial ground were replaced by municipal management. The dead were no longer primarily parish dead or neighborhood dead. They became Parisian dead, gathered into a single underground system. That shift matters. The catacombs are not just a pile of bones. They are the moment when a modern city took control of death as an urban problem. Officials did not move the bones because they wanted a Gothic masterpiece. They moved them because the living city required it. The old cemeteries were closed. The remains were transferred. The underground quarries became a solution. And over time, that solution became one of the most unforgettable places in Europe. What makes the catacombs especially eerie is the tension between order and horror. If you imagine millions of bones underground, you might picture chaos. But the public ossuary is structured. The bones are set into careful facades. Behind the visible walls, more remains are stored. What the visitor sees is both real and staged. It is not fake, but it is curated. The catacombs present death in a way that forces contemplation. This is where the place becomes almost artistic, although that word can feel uncomfortable when the material is human remains. The arrangements are symmetrical. Skulls appear in lines, crosses, hearts, and geometric patterns in some areas. Long bones create horizontal bands. Stone plaques identify cemeteries or carry inscriptions. The lighting is low. The corridors are narrow. The experience is designed to slow you down. You cannot rush through the catacombs without feeling that the space resists you. The air itself seems to press against speed. It is cool, humid, and heavy. The stone absorbs sound. Footsteps echo and fade. Voices become softer. Even people who joke in line often become quiet when they enter the ossuary. There is something about the human skull that silences a room. A skull is both a person and not a person. It is familiar because everyone has one. It is alien because we rarely see it. The face is gone, but the structure of the face remains. The eyes are empty, but the sockets still point outward. A skull can seem to look at you even though it cannot see. Now multiply that by thousands. The catacombs do not show death as one event. They show death as accumulation. One skull is tragedy. A wall of skulls is civilization stripped down to its final inventory. And still, the city above continues. That contrast has made the Paris catacombs a magnet for writers, artists, filmmakers, historians, urban explorers, and people drawn to the edge between beauty and dread. The place is not simply scary, it is intellectually disturbing. It asks questions that are older than Paris and still impossible to answer cleanly. What does a city owe its dead? Can human remains be displayed respectfully? When does memory become spectacle? Is it better for bones to be hidden away or seen and remembered? Do the catacombs honor the dead by preserving them, or do they turn them into architecture? There is no single answer. That uncertainty is part of the power. The official site today treats the catacombs as a place of history and remembrance, not as a haunted attraction. That distinction matters. The bones are real. The people were real. Their lives were not props. Behind every skull was hunger, love, pain, work, fear, desire, and a last day. But the public imagination often pulls the catacombs toward horror, and it is easy to understand why. The entrance, the descent, the warning, the bones, the darkness, the forbidden tunnels, the word catacombs itself, everything points toward fear. The challenge is to look longer than fear. Fear is the first reaction. The deeper reaction is recognition. The catacombs are frightening because they are not impossible. They are frightening because they are entirely possible. Every bone in those walls belonged to someone who once believed, at least for a while, that life was the main thing. Someone woke up late. Someone worried about money. Someone laughed too loudly. Someone lied. Someone prayed. Someone waited for a letter. Someone fell in love with the wrong person. Someone watched Paris change and thought the world they knew would last. Then time took them. The catacombs make time visible. Most cities hide time under renovation. Buildings get cleaned, streets get repaved, old neighborhoods are redesigned, cemeteries are moved, names are replaced. The past is edited until it can be consumed comfortably. But in the catacombs, time is not polished, it is stacked. You can stand in front of a wall of bones and understand, without any lecture, that a city is not only made of buildings, it is made of all the people who lived and died there, including those whose names never reached history books. That is why the catacombs are more than a strange tourist stop. They are one of the most honest monuments in Paris. The Eiffel Tower shows ambition. The Louvre shows power, art, and empire. Notre Dame shows faith, craftsmanship, and endurance. The catacombs show the cost of being a city. Every city produces waste, memory, disease, wealth, poverty, beauty, and death. Paris produced all of it, and for a time, the dead had nowhere safe to go. The catacombs became the answer. The answer was underground. When visitors descend today, they follow a route that is carefully managed. There are stairs, signs, barriers, staff, lighting, and rules. The bones are protected because they are fragile. The tunnels are protected because humidity, water infiltration, temperature changes, and human contact can damage the site. The catacombs may feel ancient and permanent, but they are not invincible. Stone wears down, bones deteriorate, walls shift, water finds paths. Even underground, time keeps working. That makes preservation complicated. The catacombs are not just a museum with objects in glass cases. The site itself is the object. The walls, bones, inscriptions, tunnels, atmosphere, and route all form the experience. Protecting it means balancing access with respect. Too many visitors, too much moisture, too much touching, too much curiosity in the wrong places. All of it can harm what people came to see. There is also an ethical question that never goes away. These are human remains. They are not fossils, they are not sculptures, they are not decorations, even when arranged decoratively. The catacombs force modern visitors to behave differently than they might in a normal attraction. A selfie can feel wrong there. Loud laughter can feel wrong. Touching the bones is not only forbidden, it feels like crossing a line that should not need explaining. The dead cannot ask for dignity. The living have to provide it. That is the difference between fascination and exploitation. A person can be fascinated by the catacombs and still treat them as a memorial. In fact, the best way to experience them is to hold both truths at once. They are visually astonishing, and they are built from real people. They are beautiful in a severe, unsettling way, and that beauty comes from death. The catacombs do not let the visitors stay innocent. The deeper you go into the story, the less simple it becomes. Take the bones themselves. Many are anonymous now. Some came from cemeteries that served ordinary people. Some came from religious communities. Some may be connected to periods of epidemic, famine, social unrest, and revolution. But once transferred and arranged, individual identity was largely lost. The catacombs preserve remains while erasing personal biography. That is both tragic and powerful. In a normal cemetery, a grave marker says, "This person was here." In the catacombs, the walls say, "All of them were here." It is collective memory, but collective memory can be cold. The catacombs remember Paris as a mass, not as a family album.
They do not give you names to mourn. They give you numbers too large to emotionally hold. Millions. The human mind struggles with that scale. 6 million is not a number you can picture honestly. You can picture one skull, maybe 10, maybe a corridor lined with bones, but millions become abstract. The catacombs turn that abstraction back into physical space. You walk and the bones continue. You turn and there are more. You keep moving and the dead keep going with you. That physical repetition creates a feeling no statistic can produce. It is one thing to hear that millions of people are buried beneath Paris. It is another thing to walk beside them in silence. The route through the ossuary creates a strange rhythm. Stone corridor, bone wall, inscription, shadow, skull, another wall, another turn, more darkness. The mind starts searching for meaning because the body is surrounded by evidence of endings. Some inscriptions in the catacombs are moral reflections, reminders of mortality, fragments of poetry or philosophy. They guide the visitor toward contemplation, but even without them, the bones speak bluntly. You are temporary, so was everyone else. That message may sound bleak, but it can also be clarifying. Many people leave the catacombs not only disturbed, but strangely awake. The place strips away noise. It makes vanity look small. It makes time feel sharp. It makes the surface city seem brighter because you have just walked through its shadow. Paris has always been a city of contrasts. It is elegant and brutal, romantic and political, polished and haunted. Revolutions happen there. Executions happen there. Art flourished there. Poverty spread there. Ideas changed the world there. People starved there. People danced there. The catacombs fit Paris because Paris has never been only one thing. The catacombs are the city admitting what beauty usually hides. They also reveal how urban history is often written through problems. The catacombs exist because of overcrowding, unsafe cemeteries, quarry collapse, public health, bureaucratic intervention, engineering, and the practical needs of a growing capital. Their beauty came later. Their mythology came later. Their role as a tourist destination came later. At the beginning, there was a problem. Too many dead bodies in the wrong place. That blunt origin matters. It keeps the story grounded. The catacombs are not mysterious because no one knows why they exist. They are mysterious because the reason is so human, so practical, and so disturbing. A city ran out of space for the dead, so it placed them under itself. The official catacombs occupy only a fraction of the underground quarry network. That fact feeds endless curiosity. People hear that the visitor route is limited, then wonder what lies beyond. The answer is not one simple thing. The broader tunnels include old quarry galleries, technical spaces, sealed areas, flooded sections, dangerous passages, and places not meant for public access. Some areas are stabilized, some are not. Some are known to inspectors and specialists. Some circulate in stories among explorers. The forbidden side of the catacombs is dangerous not because every tunnel is filled with supernatural terror, but because underground environments punish mistakes. Darkness changes distance. Similar corridors confuse direction. Phone signals may disappear. Air can be poor. Ceilings can be unstable. Water can block routes. A small injury becomes serious when you are far below the street with no easy exit. That is why illegal exploration is not just rebellious, it is risky. Yet, people keep doing it. There is something in human nature that wants to enter the sealed door.
step past the warning, and see what is not meant to be seen.
The catacombs intensify that impulse because they sit under one of the most visible cities in the world. The idea that there is another Paris beneath Paris is irresistible. It suggests that the city has a subconscious. Above ground, Paris performs. Below ground, Paris remembers. In that sense, the catacombs are not separate from the city. They are the city's hidden layer. The buildings above and the bones below belong to the same story. The stone extracted from the earth helped build the city. The empty quarries later received the city's dead. Paris took from below to rise upward, then returned its dead to the same darkness. That cycle is almost too perfect. Stone became architecture. Empty space became ossuary. The city built itself, endangered itself, saved itself, and memorialized itself using the same underground world. No fictional writer could design a cleaner metaphor. But the catacombs are not a metaphor first. They are a place. A cold, narrow, real place where visitors walk single file past bones that once held living bodies upright. That physical reality matters more than any symbol attached to it. The first time someone sees the walls, the reaction is usually immediate. The skulls are closer than expected. The bones are not behind thick glass. The corridor is not wide. The dead are not distant. They are right there. That closeness can feel invasive, as if you have stepped into a room where you were not invited. But it can also feel like the entire point. The catacombs remove the distance modern life usually creates between the living and the dead. In many modern societies, death is managed behind doors. Hospitals, funeral homes, crematoriums, cemeteries at the edge of town. The process is organized, necessary, and often hidden. The catacombs belong to a different relationship with death. They put it in front of you, not as gore, but as structure. Bone is architecture there, and that is what unsettles the mind. Architecture is supposed to protect the living. In the catacombs, architecture is made from the dead. The walls seem stable, but emotionally they are not. They disturb the categories people rely on: building, body, monument, cemetery, museum, tunnel. The catacombs are all of these and none of them completely. That ambiguity is why the site remains so hard to describe. Calling it creepy is too simple. Calling it beautiful is too easy. Calling it educational is true, but incomplete. Calling it sacred may fit some visitors and not others. The catacombs sit at the intersection of public health, history, engineering, burial practice, urban planning, art, memory, and fear. They are one of those rare places where the real explanation is more powerful than the ghost story. People often ask whether the Paris catacombs are haunted. The better question is why they feel haunted even without proof of ghosts. A place can be haunted by history. It can be haunted by scale, by silence, by anonymity, by the knowledge that millions of lives ended and left only fragments behind, by the contrast between the living city above and the dead city below, by the sense that the past is not behind you, but beside you, lining the walls. That kind of haunting does not need footsteps in the dark or whispers from nowhere. It works because the truth is already heavy enough. Still, the atmosphere invites stories. Visitors imagine movement in the shadows. Urban explorers describe strange experiences. Films and books amplify the fear. The catacombs become a canvas for whatever people bring with them: grief, curiosity, thrill-seeking, superstition, philosophy, rebellion. That is another reason the site endures. It changes depending on the person entering it. A historian sees a solution to cemetery overcrowding and quarry instability. An engineer sees reinforcement and underground infrastructure. A filmmaker sees darkness, bones, and tension. A philosopher sees mortality. A tourist sees something unforgettable. A cataphile sees a hidden city. A grieving person may see the dead differently than anyone else. The catacombs are not one story. They are a chamber where many stories echo. But the main story remains stark. Paris had too many dead.
The ground beneath Paris was hollow. Officials turned one crisis into a solution for another. Then time turned that solution into legend. The creation of the ossuary also reflects the mentality of the late Enlightenment and early modern administration. The city was becoming more regulated, more measured, more concerned with public health and order. Death, which had once been managed largely through churchyards and tradition, became something the state had to organize. The catacombs are part of that shift. They show a city moving from medieval closeness with death to modern management of death. But the result was not clean in the emotional sense. It was orderly, yes.
It was practical, yes, but it produced a monument that still overwhelms visitors centuries later.
That is the paradox of the catacombs. A rational solution created an irrational feeling. The bones were moved to solve a sanitation problem, yet the place now feels like an entrance into myth. Engineers reinforced the quarries. Administrators organized transfers. Inspectors marked galleries. Then visitors arrived and felt they were walking through the underworld. Human beings do this constantly. We create practical systems, and then those systems gather meaning beyond their original purpose. A bridge becomes a symbol. A prison becomes a warning. A battlefield becomes sacred ground. The catacombs became an empire of death because the facts arranged themselves into something larger than bureaucracy. Even the geography adds to the power. The catacombs are beneath Paris, not outside it. The dead are not banished to a remote place.
They remain under the city, part of its foundation, part of its unseen memory. Every day, people pass above without thinking about them. Trains run, cars move, shoes hit pavement. Life crosses over death again and again. That layered existence is deeply Parisian. The surface city depends on forgetting. The underground city depends on remembering. When you enter the catacombs, you participate in that act of remembering, even if you came only out of curiosity. You cannot look at the bones and completely avoid the fact that they belong to people. You cannot walk past them as if they were ordinary stones, at least not for long. Some visitors may try. They take pictures quickly, make jokes, move on. But the place has patience. It does not need everyone to understand immediately. It waits underground. It has been waiting for centuries. The catacombs also challenge the way people consume dark history. Modern audiences are drawn to abandoned hospitals, disaster sites, serial killer stories, plague villages, execution grounds, and haunted locations. There is a hunger for the macabre. Sometimes that hunger becomes shallow, but at its best, it reflects a real need to face what normal life avoids. The Paris catacombs are dark history in its purest form because they do not center on one villain or one event. They center on the ordinary certainty of death multiplied by an entire city. No monster is needed. The monster is time. Time fills cemeteries. Time collapses walls. Time erases names. Time turns bodies into bones. Time turns practical tunnels into tourist destinations. Time turns fear into heritage. Time turns people into history, and then history into silence. The catacombs are what time looks like when it is given a corridor. That may be why the place feels strangely calm despite its horror. The dead are not attacking. They are not asking for anything. They are present. Their silence is total. The discomfort comes from the living mind trying to interpret that silence. In the end, the catacombs do not scare everyone in the same way. Some people are afraid of the bones. Some are afraid of the tunnels. Some are afraid of getting lost. Some are afraid of what the place makes them think about. For many, the deepest fear is not the darkness around them, but the realization that life above ground is just as temporary as everything below. You leave through another staircase and return to Paris. That return is part of the experience. The noise comes back, the light changes, the air feels different. People are walking by, unaware of what you just saw, or pretending not to think about it. The city resumes its performance. But for a while, the surface feels thin. That is the feeling the catacombs leave behind. The sense that the world you know is only the top layer. Under the pavement, there are older truths. Under beauty, there is decay. Under memory, there is anonymity. Under Paris, there is the Empire of Death. And maybe that is why people keep going down. Not only to be frightened, not only to see bones, not only to say they visited one of the darkest places in Europe. People go down because the catacombs offer something rare in the modern world, a direct encounter with the thing everyone knows and everyone avoids. Death is usually abstract until it becomes personal. The catacombs make it collective, physical, unavoidable. They do not tell you how to feel. They simply place you in a corridor with millions of dead Parisians and let the silence do the work. The result is not just fear, it is perspective. Because when you stand beneath Paris, surrounded by skulls that once belonged to people who had plans, secrets, debts, desires, and names, the surface world becomes both more fragile and more precious. The ordinary noise of life begins to seem miraculous. A crowded street becomes proof that time has not taken everyone yet. A warm bakery window becomes defiance. A laugh in the open air becomes something almost sacred. The catacombs do not only show death, they sharpen life. That is the part many people miss. The place is dark, but its effect is not only darkness. By forcing visitors to look at mortality, it makes the living city above feel more intense. Paris becomes not less beautiful, but more honest. The romance remains, the art remains, the cafés remain, but now they exist beside the truth, not apart from it. That truth is carved into the entrance of the ossuary, but it belongs to every city and every person. Stop. This is the empire of death. The words are not only a warning about what lies ahead, they are a warning about what lies beneath everything. Long before the catacombs became famous, before the cameras, before the guided tours, before the myths, there were workers carrying bones in the dark. There were city officials trying to solve a problem no one wanted to look at. There were quarry inspectors strengthening fragile passages under the streets. There were cemeteries being emptied because the living could no longer tolerate what centuries of death had created. The story is not glamorous. It is better than glamorous. It is real. And reality, in the catacombs, is more unsettling than anything invented. Think about the first workers who entered those quarries with the knowledge that they were preparing a home for the dead. They were not walking into a finished monument. They were walking into damp galleries, rough stone, darkness, and labor. They had to move remains, organize space, and transform an underground industrial void into a municipal ossuary. There is something almost impossible to imagine in that work, handling the dead not as one body, but as countless fragments. Not one funeral, but an entire city's backlog of mortality. The task required endurance of a kind most modern people will never experience. Every bone had to be moved by someone. Every orderly wall began as disorder. Every silent corridor was made through human labor. When visitors look at the catacombs, they usually think of the dead, but the living built that underworld. Workers, inspectors, administrators, priests, designers, guards, restorers, and later museum staff all shaped what the site became. The catacombs are a collaboration between the dead and the living, between necessity and imagination. That collaboration continues today. Preservation teams work to keep the site stable. Rules exist to protect the bones and the tunnels. Researchers study what can be learned without turning the dead into mere specimens. Guides and historians try to explain the site without reducing it to shock value. This matters because the catacombs are still changing. They may feel frozen in time, but they are not. Humidity changes them. Visitor traffic changes them. Restoration changes them. New research changes what people understand about them. Ethical conversations change how human remains are displayed and interpreted. The catacombs are old, but the questions around them are modern. Should the dead be seen by hundreds of thousands of visitors? Does public access preserve memory or consume it? Can a place be both a tourist destination and a memorial? How do you protect bones from damage while allowing people to confront the history they represent? These questions do not have easy answers, and maybe they should not. Easy answers would make the catacombs smaller than they are. A place like this should remain difficult. It should make people uneasy. Not because unease is entertaining, but because unease can be honest.
The catacombs are not comfortable history. They are not clean history. They are a reminder that cities solve problems in ways that later generations inherit as monuments. And Paris inherited one of the strangest monuments ever created. The deeper one studies the catacombs, the more they seem to connect separate parts of human experience: architecture, death, sanitation, government, religion, class, memory, tourism, rebellion, fear. Few places contain so many layers in such a literal way. There is the geological layer. Limestone formed long before humans built Paris. There is the industrial layer. Quarries cut into the stone to feed the city's construction. There is the urban layer. Streets and buildings spreading over hollow ground. There is the crisis layer. Cemeteries overflowing and threatening public health. There is the administrative layer. Officials creating systems to inspect, stabilize, transfer, and store. There is the memorial layer, bones arranged into a place of reflection. There is the myth layer, stories, films, explorers, legends, fear. All of those layers exist at once in the catacombs.
That is why the place rewards more than a quick visit.
The visual shock is immediate, but the meaning takes longer. You may go down for the skulls and come back thinking about cities, memory, and the way societies manage what they fear. The catacombs are not just about death underground. They are about what happens when death becomes too present above ground. Paris did not hide the dead because people were sentimental. It hid them because the living city demanded space, health, and order. Yet by hiding them underground, Paris accidentally created a place where death became more visible than ever. That irony is central. The dead were moved out of sight, and the result became one of the most famous places to see the dead in the world. A solution became a spectacle. A storage site became a symbol. A municipal ossuary became a legend. And still, beneath the legend, the bones remain. They are not impressed by fame. They do not know about tickets, cameras, documentaries, or online videos.
They do not know that people cross oceans to walk past them. They do not know that their silence has become part of Paris's identity. They simply remain, arranged in the dark, holding the city's memory in the most literal way possible. That may be the final truth of the catacombs. They are famous, but the dead inside them are mostly nameless. Fame belongs to the place. Anonymity belongs to the people. And that imbalance should stay in the mind of anyone telling the story. It is easy to say 6 million and move on. It is harder to remember that the number is made of individual lives. A person who feared winter. A person who loved music. A person who stole bread. A person who never left Paris. A person who hated Paris. A person who died young. A person who lived long enough to watch everyone else disappear. The catacombs are full of those lost specifics. Their absence is the point. The walls show us what remains when names, clothes, voices, and faces are gone.
They show the common structure beneath every identity. They reduce humanity to bone, but in doing so, they also remind us how much more a human life is than bone. That tension is painful and necessary. A skull is not a life. It is the last architecture of a life. The catacombs are filled with that architecture. So when people ask what makes the Paris catacombs so mysterious, the answer is not only that they are underground or full of bones. The mystery is that they are completely explainable and still feel impossible. We know why they were made. We know when the ossuary was consecrated. We know the broad story of the cemetery crisis, the quarries, the transfers, the public opening. And yet, standing there, surrounded by skulls, facts alone do not contain the experience. History explains the catacombs. It does not exhaust them. That is the mark of a truly powerful place. It can be documented, mapped, studied, restored, and managed, and still leave something unresolved in the visitor. Maybe that unresolved feeling is the presence of the dead. Maybe it is the scale. Maybe it is the knowledge that every city has hidden foundations, but Paris lets you walk through one of them. Maybe it is simply the shock of seeing the final human truth arranged with such calm precision. Whatever it is, it stays. Long after you leave, you may remember a particular skull in the wall, even though it was one among thousands. You may remember the damp air, the low ceiling, the way voices changed underground, the warning above the entrance, the feeling of returning to daylight. You may remember that Paris, the city of light, guards its darkest monument not in a tower, not in a palace, not behind a golden frame, but beneath the street. And that is where the story should end, not with a scream, but with the silence that makes a scream unnecessary. Because the catacombs do not chase you, they wait. They waited before you were born. They will wait after you leave.
Under the cafés, under the traffic, under the apartments and bakeries and metro lines, under the footsteps of millions who never think about them, the bones remain in the cool dark. Paris keeps living above them. The dead keep holding their place below. And between those two worlds, a staircase descends. Anyone can walk down. Not everyone comes back seeing the city the same way.